This video is a continuation from the previous video. So when we talk about visual communication, we can use literary communication as a reference. So we're going to talk about grammar, vocabulary, alphabet, things like that. They are analogous. Okay? So communication requires language. Right? That language can be spoken, it can be gestural, and it can also be visual. And that is what we use. We use visual communication, visual language, visual vocabulary, visual grammar. Design is that form of visual communication. So the more you understand the language, the better you can communicate that language. You can, for analogy, you can think about trying to learn French or German or Spanish, or I'm just trying to think of different languages, and Chinese. I mean, that is completely different. Russian, right? They have different characters and different way of working. That's not even just rearranging the alphabet differently. That are different rules to the alphabet. That's brand new rules. And so it's no different when you're trying to learn a visual language like design, because you now have to learn a different alphabet, different vocabulary, different grammar, different culture. And so, as we talked about, design elements can be like letters and words. And so when we add the design principles to them, we form a visual grammar. And as we learn to use both, we then enable ourselves to communicate visually. You become proficient in this new language of design. And ultimately, once we do that, we truly become designers and artists. And, there's argument, obviously. It's debatable as to who defines who is an artist, who is a designer. And one analogy I like to give is, does someone with a camera automatically become a photographer? Are you a photographer just because you have a camera and use it? Does that make you a photographer? And, it's an open question. Does it? And, obviously there are arguments on both sides of that. So what makes you a designer? What makes you an artist? And so a lot of people, to clarify, like to start to use the terms award-winning or exceptional or, other adjectives that qualify and quantify the type of designer and artist. Because, just saying that you're an artist in our society is enough for you to be an artist. But are you? Okay, so here are some facts. We process visuals 60 times faster, and by visuals I mean images, than text. 90% of the information is sent to the brain of visual information. 93% of human communication is visual, and 65% of people are primarily visual learners. One thing about that is almost all people are visual learners in some capacity. It may not be their primary learning style. It may be their secondary or their third, but the majority of human beings learn visually in some capacity. But most of us that are visual learners, we are the majority. And so people retain 80% of what they see, only 20% of what they read, and 10% of what they hear. And that is why, while I'm speaking to you, there are visuals. There's text. So I know that adds up to 110%, and it doesn't work that way. But we're covering all the different bases. And then you all are going to have access to these files to look at them again. And I highly encourage you to do that. The more you look at something, the better you retain it. Okay, so we're going to define visual grammar here, and I have a quote here by a designer. The reason for writing a grammar of visual language is the same as for any language: to define its basic elements, describe its patterns and processes, and to understand the relationship between the individual elements in the system. Visual language has no formal syntax or semantics, but the visual objects themselves can be classified. Okay. And that's what we mean by principles and elements of design. We are classifying the visual language that we are going to use. So, what he means by there's no formal syntax or semantics, what he means is if we put a circle on a page and a rectangle to the right of it and a curved line to the right of the rectangle, that it would mean the same thing to all people. It doesn't. And it goes back to the things that we've already discussed regarding personal grammar, personal culture, one's local culture of society, and beyond. And so, the things mean different things to people. And so it won't. So that makes it a lot harder to think and communicate visually, though it does make it more interesting. But it's one reason a single design problem can have so many different design solutions. You all will get the same assignments and you will all produce different solutions. And they will all be valid. And so that's one of the reasons it's really hard to cheat in this field, is because you all will develop a visual design fingerprint. And the longer we work together, the more I'll get to know your style and your fingerprint and know it's your work. I have students that I've been working with for a couple of years, and you could show me a series of videos and I would know which one was theirs because they have a style to them. Okay, so for instance, and here are some examples of what we just talked about in theory. What does the color orange mean to you? What do you feel when you see orange? What is your favorite color and why? And by the way, young people like orange, older people don't. And that's a very gross, broad generalization because there are certainly older people that like orange. I don't know. I'm older. I'm certainly past the midpoint. I'm never going to live to be in my hundreds, I don't think. But I like orange. So there are exceptions. But in general, if your audience is older, you wouldn't want to use these colors. They just get offended by them. I actually know this from personal experience. I had a client and we were designing a space, and their color palette included a shade of orange. They gave us 4 colors in their color palette that were their company branded colors. And I picked orange to use because I really like it. And so one of the people at the company just totally hated it and was not shy about telling me how much he hated the fact that I used orange and told me to take it out. And I was like, well, it's on your color palette. And he's like, I change it, and so it's like, all right. But just some things you learn the hard way sometimes. Okay, so defining visual grammar. And here are some examples. In the example over here, all these objects are squares, but they are not the same. Why is that? Why are they not the same? They're all squares. And so that is part of the principles and elements of design. In this case, the element is the squares, are the squares. That was grammatically incorrect. We're talking about grammar, and Ms. V just made a faux pas. So the squares are the elements. The color black is an element. The color yellow is an element. But everything else about their arrangement and their number are principles. And that is why they're not the same. Okay? So objects, the basic elements we have to work with, in this case, squares, these can be abstract or concrete. We have structure. These are the patterns formed from our basic elements. Again, they can be abstract or concrete, and you see patterns. For instance, the pattern over here in this, right, it's not laid out very well. It's not aligned. It drives me nuts. I used to not be like this, but the longer I have been in this profession, the more all things that are not aligned, just slightly, really stick in my craw. So, but there's still a pattern here, right? There's a certain space between the squares in each row, and then each row itself shifts over. So that becomes a pattern. Activities are the processes we can represent with our basic elements and patterns. And for instance, this is tumbling based on how these have been laid out, right? This is rolling into this one. That is an activity. And then relations, the relationships between objects, patterns, and processes. They're the way everything in your design relates to each other and the viewer. Objects and structures will both be further subdivided into abstract and concrete sections. And I know that's a lot to swallow, but we'll get into it. We'll break it down further. It's important to know the overview in order to begin to piece this together. Okay, so objects are the basic elements at our disposal. They're akin to letters and words. We use them to express different ideas and concepts. A circle is an object, a line, in the same way that a line is a single character of type. A single point is an object, as in an image of a person holding your product. Objects are the most basic elements we can add to any design, and they can be abstract or concrete. This is abstraction, as we've talked about this before. And abstract objects are idealized shapes that can't be physically created. And so we're talking about in residential design, right? We are physically creating objects, but it doesn't mean that there can't be abstraction in the invisible design that we use to string those objects together, those non-abstract objects together. Abstract objects can include points, lines, surfaces, and volumes, and you have an example of several of those over here. So in this image, there's a video here that you can click on to get more information about this. The 12 dimensions, we're up to 12, we live in 3, right? So humans are aware of one-dimensional space, which is length, two-dimensional space, which is width, and three-dimensional space, which is height. Time is the 4th dimension, but we obviously don't see it fully. We only see it 1 second at a time. And that is the same as a two-dimensional object passing through, a three-dimensional object passing through a two-dimensional world is only seen in that two-dimensional world as what slices through the paper. We're the same way as our 3-dimension passing through time, we only see 1 second at a time. And so scientists have hypothesized that there are 12 or more distinct dimensions in the cosmos, and they've tried to explain that. And so here in this design, there is theoretical abstraction to the layout of the movement of the arms. And I have seen this beautifully applied, and I will show you examples of how it's been applied to architecture. So this is when we talk about abstraction, abstract objects driving your design. This is what we're talking about. Concrete objects are things that we can touch and define. Forms or shapes can be geometric, organic, or random, which is sometimes called abstract. And these are examples of those shapes, right? They are forms and shapes, 3-dimensional. Forms are 3-dimensional, shapes are 2-dimensional. And they're abstract. That's abstraction. So we talk about abstraction. This is what we're talking about. This clearly looks like a chair and something in the chair, or something else, right? So that's one of the beautiful things about abstraction. You start to think about it and try to figure out what it is. And you pull your audience in when you do this. Concrete objects have form, sometimes shape. Shape is 2-dimensional, form is 3-dimensional. Size, color, and you can have other things, pattern, and we'll talk further about more, right? Any element we place on the page is a concrete object. Any object we build is a concrete object. Concrete objects are things that we build. And this is the shell house. This is concrete. We can touch this. However, it was based on abstraction and the interpretation of abstract objects that we can't touch. Abstract objects exist to talk about objects in general in order to better describe them. Okay, we're going to stop this here, and I hope this video uploads because I'm over my time and I wasn't watching it.